When we say that God is eternal, we're talking about an idea that's foreign to us because we keep track of time. We keep track of time in the day. We keep track of time throughout the year, the calendars. We keep track through our lifetime, years, and years that preceded us. We measure time. God, being eternal, lives outside of time. Time is something that is part of physical creation, but it is not part of God's personal existence. And so when we're talking about eternity, we're going to have to just admit that we're talking about something that's a bit foreign to the way we think about it, but hopefully as we go through it in the next couple of days, we'll understand it better. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and we're talking about, or trying to answer the question, who is God? How does God reveal himself in Scripture? And one of the qualities that he reveals is that he is eternal. Now, eternality, or being eternal, is a characteristic of God's nature. And we have been looking, if you remember, at God's attributes, qualities, goodness, holiness, love, and so forth, these qualities that describe how God functions, what he does, the very basis of his activities with us. And so we've been looking at these, but eternality doesn't tell us how he functions. It just tells us that this is his state. His state is that he is an eternal being. He's not bound by time. And so we're going to move to this idea of God's eternality. And we're going to start in the book of Isaiah today in verse 57. And it says, and there's a long section in Isaiah. I'd encourage you to read it. It starts back around chapter 40 or so. And you read through this, and there are several chapters in which God taunts Israel for their idolatry, for the fact that they worship other gods. And the reason he does that is he says, because these gods aren't real. There may be spirit beings behind those false gods, but those spirit beings, he created them. So there's things they just absolutely can't do. They're maybe a little bit more powerful than us, but they're infinitely less powerful than God. So we come to Isaiah 57 and verse 13. When you cry out, let your collection of idols deliver you. You're going to cry out for help? Okay, well, let those idols that you worship, let them help you. The wind will carry them all away, and a breath will take them away. In other words, they're so slight and so insignificant. Even if they were made out of wood and metal and stone, they're still absolutely really insignificant when you compare them to God. But he who takes refuge in me will inherit the land and will possess my holy mountain. And it will be said, build up, prepare the way, remove every obstacle out of the way of my people. For thus says the high and exalted one. See, he's the one that's over all things. The one who lives or dwells, and we have forever or dwells in eternity, lives forever. The word that's translated lives over here in the Hebrew, shakain, means to dwell in a place, to exist in a place. And so it's saying that God dwells in eternity. And his name is holy, and I dwell on high and holy place. And so, but the main point here is he lives forever, or he dwells in this place that's not bound by time. That's what he's looking at here. And he uses one of about 3 or 4 different words that the Old Testament uses to communicate some idea of either a time that's very long or a time that doesn't exist, what we would call eternity. But he lives forever. Psalm 90, it says, before the mountains were born, or ever you gave birth to the earth. So going way back before any of this creation existed, and gave birth to the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And let me pull this up here. This everlasting, we have a different word. Over in Psalm 57, we have the word ad. Over here we have the word olam. From olam, ad olam. You are God. And so he says, God's always existing. As eternity exists, from a human perspective, it looks like from eternity to eternity, but it's just eternity for God. And he says, you're always God. And you've always been God. That's the whole point of this. And physical creation and all things that are physical, all things that are part of creation, well, those things all had a beginning. And we'll come back and we'll look at that sometime in this study. Go to Psalm 102. It says, of old you founded the earth and the heavens. In other words, it was a long time ago from the psalmist's point of view. And they are the work of your hands. Even they will perish. Yeah, the universe is not forever. But you endure, literally, but you stand. All of them wear out like a garment, like clothing. You will change them, and they will be changed. Verse 27. But you are the same, and your years will not come to an end. I'm in my mind, I'm not that old, except my wife and I sit around and talk about the fact that, boy, when we were kids and we saw people our age, we were thinking, oh, those are old people. And I don't particularly feel old, except that, well, yeah, I've got an elbow here that's been giving me a lot of pain, and my leg bothers me. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, and there's things you're thinking, it wasn't that long ago that I did this all the time, and now that's more of a challenge. Why? Because we're part of this creation to which he's referring. And these things change and these things wear out. But you know, God doesn't. And is that something that actually should be encouraging and comforting for us? That even as we age, as we live in a universe that changes, in a world that changes, as we change and wear out, to know that God does not. And we just got done looking at God's character of being truth. And part of that truth is an expression of faithfulness. And all of this can hinge and relate to the fact that because God doesn't change in his nature, because he continues to stand when everything else wears out, we're able to say, you're able to stand by those promises. I might come to somebody and they might and make a promise to them, and 10 years later they come back and they say, hey, you know, you promised that you'd help me if I ever needed that. And I'd say, man, but you know what's happened in the last 10 years? I can't do that anymore. Yeah. It's this idea that things change down here, but God does not. That's part of his eternality, is that he does not change. Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 27, it says, the eternal God is a dwelling place, or it's like a refuge place, a hiding place. The eternal God is that dwelling place, and he calls him. And this word for eternal, kedem, was a word that meant from the east, is literally the background of this word, but they used it of this God that, you know, came from here. And he's like always this one that has always been. If you went back to the beginning, because they looked at the sun rising from the east and they said, this is God. He's always been here in this sense. So our Bibles, our modern translations translate this eternal. And they have, I think the Hebrews, when they use this term, they have a slightly different idea of eternity as they express this than the way that we would look at it. There's, like I said, a variety of words. We've already seen three of these expressions, these words that they use. In Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 28, it says, do you not know and have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become, because he is everlasting, and this word everlasting is our word olam, which can mean just very old or from a very long time ago, but it also has passages which it clearly is going to describe eternity. So I think eternal, the eternal God, we also could put here, does not become weary or tired. Again, what a wonderful thing to know when we're talking about the eternal God, not affected by time in the same way that we are. I don't mean to keep talking about myself, but I remember not that many years ago, I'd do stuff all day long. I could work all day long. I'd come home, I'd sit in my chair in the living room, and I could study in the evening, and I was fine. Go to bed, I was fine. Now, I'm busy all day. I come home, I sit down in that chair, and boy, I have problems staying awake. I become wearied and tired. Things change as time passes, but not for God. The last one I want to look at today is in Romans chapter 16. And it's talking about God stabilizing us. And in fact, if you go to the channel and you look at the playlist, there's a whole playlist on the book of Romans and the message of how God stabilizes us as believers. And we go through verses of Romans chapter 5 through the end of the book in quite a bit of detail, and not every verse, but it comes down to what God is doing. That God is, it says, he's the one that is able to establish us, to make us firm. And this brings us then to verse 26, talking about this promise that God has, but now it is manifested by the scriptures that are prophetic, according to the commandment of notice, the eternal God. And this word for commandment that he uses here, if I can get it to come up here, it's this word command. It's literally something he's placed in order. He's set it in place that now it's the time on the calendar for it to come about. And so he set this in order, but he's the eternal God. And he's made known to all the nations, leading to an obedience of faith. But he's the eternal God. And he's the eternal God that can stabilize us. This is the whole point back in verse 25. He can stabilize us even if we don't learn how to come to stability till later in life. And even as we're wearing out and getting tired and all these things, because he's the eternal God and does not become wearied and tired. He's the God that can finish what he started, and he really can stabilize us as believers. The eternal God. Something to worship him for. Maybe when you feel those aches and pains, or you try to do something and go, wow, that's not as easy as it used to be. Or you just watch things changing in the world around you, and instead of pulling out your hair going, no, I don't like this world, I don't like the way it's changing, go. But there is an unchanging God. One true God. The unchanging God. The eternal God. And appreciate his eternality. Worship him for his eternality, that he does not change in these things, and that he doesn't weary. He doesn't become tired. He remains. That's something worth worshiping him for, something that should encourage your heart as you look at all these things and look at yourself. And I trust that that's helpful for you today, thinking about our great God. And with that, I encourage you, as always, to have a good day in the Lord. And I thank you for joining me.